Okay, so first a little introduction. Even though I'm feeling better, I am definitely losing my voice, and I've been trying to conserve it throughout the day. I know we usually try to keep this year to an hour and it ends up going closer to 2 hours. But if my voice gives out, then we'll stop earlier, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we're actually going to start in a different way than we usually start, which is we're going to review what we did last time, because what I found was that I was under the impression that the mishnah on tap for tonight was related, but it seems like most of the Mefarshim say it's like a continuation. So many of them didn't really have much new stuff to say about our mishnah that wasn't already said in the last mishnah. So let's do a quick review of last time. And I don't remember who was here and who wasn't here. So if you have any questions, that's fine. You can ask. Okay. So in our count, we had Pirkei Avos 3:9 last time. Someone who's walking on the way and is learning or reviewing, and he interrupts his learning, and he says, how beautiful is this tree? How beautiful is this plowed field? The Torah considers it as though he's liable for his soul. Okay, now we're going to review, but we're going to review very, very quickly. I'm not going to read through all the questions. So our major question was, like, what exactly is this? What exact behavior is this condemning, and why such a harsh condemnation for such a seemingly trivial, action? Okay, so we did three basic approaches. Okay, we did the Abrabnel, we did the Meiri, and we did the Rבינו Yonah. Okay, so the Abrabnel is the one who first of all clarified the facts. He said, this is not talking about just admiring a tree in a vacuum. If you're just walking along and not learning and you admire a tree, nothing wrong with that. But if you are learning and then you stop to be involved in something which has no purpose, so then he says what you're doing is you're taking the ikar, the main thing, which is learning, and you're making it tafel, you're making it secondary to something which is just meaningless. And the way he expresses it specifically, when he says you're liable for your soul, is he says, you were removing from your intellectual soul, your rational soul, the perfection that was clinging to it through the learning and your study. It's like you are incurring liability to the king for with the punishment of the soul. So what we said there last week was that, and I'm going to clarify it. I think I was not clear with my analogy last time because I didn't have it clear in my head. So we said that when you are learning, then it's like your soul is plugged into life support, okay, and you're nourishing it with what it needs to thrive. So if you were to pull the plug, you would be cutting it off from let's actually make it a little bit sorry, let me make the analogy a little bit closer to the mishnah. Let's say you pull the plug in order to admire the plug. Okay, like, oh, what a beautiful plug. So if you did that, first of all, you're cutting your soul off from its nourishment, but because you are removing it from life support, that is a crime worthy of being killed. Okay, in other words, there's a consequence of doing it, but the way that the Abrabnel seems to be learning it is that you're incurring a punishment for the decision to commit that crime. Okay, in other words, he's not learning it as though, I think last time we asked the question, is this just a natural result? Like, is it just that you're naturally going to be depriving your soul of its nourishment, which is an approach that Meiri seems to take. But the Abrabnel seems to be saying you're taking the ikar and you're making it tafel, you're depriving your soul of its nourishment, and you're incurring liability to the king for that. Okay, so that's approach number one. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, approach number two, yeah.
So you're saying what it's not saying, Mishlei Podcast, you're saying it's not saying that it is like killing your soul. It's like not the thing that Abrabnel is reading.
Yeah, in other words, it is depriving your soul of what it needs, but he's treating it as an onesh, not as a consequence, like as a punishment, not as a natural result. Okay. In contrast, the Meiri said, First of all, the Meiri clarified the parameters. He said that if you have to interrupt your Torah for something that's necessary, fine. But once you've interrupted, don't permit yourself to then continue on in frivolous talk, okay, for stuff that's not important. Secondly, he clarified that this is not just true of set learning when you're sitting there like in shiur with a chavrusa or learning by yourself, but this is even for casual learning. And that's why he says it's using this example where you're walking on, you're walking on the way, on your way to like your grocery store or whatever, and you're not even learning with anyone, and you're just like like reviewing in your mind. Don't say to yourself, oh, this is just casual, it's okay if I interrupt. And he says if you interrupt, it's ilu eno osik b'Torah klal. It's as if you're not involved in Torah at all. And that's the real liability. So he is learning as a result. He's saying that if you're going to interrupt your learning, you should regard that as though not as learning that got interrupted. You should regard it as it's like I just was never learning in the first place. And then he says something which we were astonished by. He says, the reason is that a person by nature is drawn after nonsense and frivolous conversations, and he will be drawn in by this until he casts off the yoke of Torah completely. And that's why he attaches it to the mishnah that we're going to do. So I'll call you a second figure. So our question was, that seems to be hyperbole, right? Like, does it really mean that if I'm involved in learning and I say, oh, how beautiful is this tree, and you fast forward, a year down the line, that I'm going to be like committing crimes, eating cheeseburgers? Like, it sounds like it's a slippery slope. So the question is, what do you mean? Yeah, Figa.
So I'm just wondering how significant it is that it says va'omer, like, and that it's verbal. Right. Yeah. And if it's just like a mental distraction, like your mind just wanders, if that's the same level of
right. So it is. I don't remember what we said about that last time, but it seems like the Mefarshim are taking it as lav davka conversation or lav davka exclamation. In other words, it seems to be even just a distraction, and it's like, like saying to yourself, "What a beautiful tree," That's how we learned it last time, I believe. Okay, so the question is, what is the Meiri's idea here? So what we answered last time is we said that, yeah, obviously it's not like you're going to start, it's not like you're going to cast off the entire yoke of Torah just after you comment on a tree. Rather, what he means is there is a part of a person that yearns to be free from the yoke of Torah, okay? And that is the part of you that is the cause. I mean, it's the Yetzer Hara, but that's the part of you that causes averos. That's the part of you that resists mitzvos, and that's the part of you that rejoices when you interrupt your Torah in the same way that kids rejoice when they leave school at the end of the day. That was the thing we mentioned. So what the Meiri is saying is, he's saying, if you have to interrupt your Torah for something necessary, fine. But if you're interrupting it for something frivolous, you are giving into the same part of yourself that is the cause of you casting off the yoke of Torah. So you're strengthening that part of yourself. So I think that's what he means when he says that not that you're literally going to actually cast off the yoke of Torah, but you're going to be giving power to that part of yourself, even if you interrupt casual learning for something trivial. Okay. Then the third opinion we did was Rביnu Yonah, who said that this is talking about the awe that you need to have while you're learning Torah. He says that if you're involved in Torah, then you shouldn't be involved in frivolous chatter, because you should sit in awe and yira and ema, in fear and awe of the Torah, and realize that it's the crown of God, and therefore you need to have the proper awe. He says, and if you are frivolous to the point where you interrupt your learning, then you're liable for your soul. So we said there, the idea is that Torah is not like any other subject. Torah is mipia gvura, it's from God, and it's the instructions to you about how to live, and it should be treated with that the proper reverence. And so I thought of an analogy of this. Anyone want to volunteer an example of an expert in a field who you really, really look up to, that you would value having a conversation with? about their craft or about their expertise. Or even a celebrity. Everyone's too shy. Okay, yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I felt bad because no one was talking. There's this researcher who works at Queens College who I work in a research lab there, and she works kind of in a parallel line of study, and I've always followed her work because we're colleagues.
Okay, cool.
It's very interesting stuff.
Okay, all right, good.
So I always try to get opportunities there.
Okay, good. So let's take that example. And the reason why I want to ground it in an example is because that's how Mishlei works, is that you're going to affect your emotions more if you ground it in an example. So think about the difference between if you are reading something that this person wrote versus if you're having a conversation and working side by side with this person. Chances are, if you're actually in an opportunity where you can work with this person, you are going to be hyper focused on what this person says and on hanging on their every word and really, making a note to yourself to remember what's being said. And you're going to treat it with a certain gravity that you wouldn't treat it if you were just casually browsing their words. That, I think, is how we should view Torah, is that we tend to view Torah as just text or whatever, like any other area of knowledge, but really it is, mipia gvura. It's from God to human beings. God revealed himself on Har Sinai and gave this to us, and we should have that all when we learn about it. So to compare and contrast the three opinions, the main question is, what are you incurring liability for? According to the Abrabnel, the liability is incurred by taking Torah, which is the main thing, and then rendering it secondary to something insignificant. According to the Meiri, your liability comes from giving into the part of yourself that wants to cast off the yoke of Torah altogether. And according to Rabbeinu Yonah, the liability is incurred from not having the proper awe for Torah. Okay, so that's the review. Any questions on the review? Okay, so now let's go to the new Mishnah. Okay, so again, in many versions of Pirkei Avos, this is just a continuation. Okay, Rabbi Dostai Rabbi Yanai Mishum Rabbi Meir Omer. I translated ahead of time this time. Rabbi Dostai, the son of Rabbi Yanai, said in the name of Rabbi Meir, Kol ha'shocheach davar echad mimishnaso, anyone who forgets anything from his learning, ma'ale alav kasav ki'ilu mischayev b'nafsho. The Torah considers it as though he's liable for his soul. Shneimar, as it is stated, Raki shamar lecha ushmor nafshcha me'od pentishkach es hadavarim asher ra'u einecha. Only be careful for yourself and guard your soul exceedingly, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw. Yachol afilu takfa alav mishnaso. You might think this applies even if you were overpowered by your learning. Okay, meaning that you're liable for your soul even if you're overpowered by your learning. Talmud Lomar, therefore, the pasuk goes on to say, "Ufen yasuru milvavecha kol yimei chayecha," lest you remove them from your heart all the days of your life. Ha eno mischayev b'nafsho ad sheyeshiv v'yisirim milibo, which means that you're not liable until you sit and remove them from your heart. Okay, so meaning not if you're just overpowered by your learning. Okay, what are the questions and problems? Yeah, tomorrow.
What does it mean to be overpowered by your learning?
Okay. What does it mean to be overpowered by your learning? Good. And we might as well ask also, and why are you not chayev for that? Yael?
I don't know if this is actually a question, but I'm just confused what his concluding statement is. Is it you're liable for your soul if you sit and remove it from your heart, or that if you just forget it?
No, it's only you are only liable. I'll clarify this. He is only liable when he sits and removes them from his heart, but not if he just is overpowered by his learning.
Okay, then I guess I would say, why does he even start with the first statement that you're liable if you forget it?
Okay, so you mean this statement here? Why is he stated so broadly?
Yeah.
So the way I would take it here is he is just clarifying. So Okay. You could argue with me, okay, but I'm gonna. This is how I'm reading it. Is all of this is Rabbi Meir, and all of this is from the same pasuk, and he could have just presented the pasuk by saying, anyone who forgets one thing from anyone who deliberately, sits and removes his learning from his heart is liable for his soul, and he could have quoted the whole pasuk, but instead he says. He frames it in the broad way and then he qualifies it. And the reason why he does that is in order to make it very clear that you are not liable if you are overpowered by your learning. So in other words, it's as if he is saying anyone who forgets one thing from his learning by removing it from his heart is liable for his soul. It's just a style presentation, if that makes any sense. Yeah, Tamar?
I mean, I feel like there's a lot of questions to ask about what things are, but I guess what does it mean to remove your learning from your heart?
Okay.
And I guess specifically to sit and remove your learning from your heart.
Right. What does it mean to sit and remove learning from your heart? Okay. I don't know about you, but I have never sat down and just forgotten something. Okay. Like, and I don't think it's possible. And if it were possible, it would be very convenient because there are certain things that you want to forget, So it's just a very weird lashon, So what does that mean? It's a good question.
Ask a clarification question.
Sure.
Going off of Yael's question. Okay, let's say I forget it. I forget something from my learning, but I was not overpowered by my learning.
Right.
Do I fall into the first category and now I'm liable for my soul, or no? We're just going to assume everyone is overpowered when they forget things.
Okay, so let me just hold on a second. Tell me if this is another way of asking the question. That are these the only two categories?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Is it either your one second? Can you?
Right, because he's stating it in like a binary way, right? Like
yes.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'm gonna tack that on to here. Okay. Furthermore, and if you feel like I am missing part of your question, then feel free to ask it again. Furthermore, are these the only two possibilities? Okay, and anything that is not overpowered by your learning is in this category, and vice versa. Okay. All right.
Wait, so that would mean if you forget something, either you're overpowered by your learning or you removed it from your heart. Right,
Exactly,
right. Yeah, I want to know, is there because I feel like I forget lots of things, but I'm not like over.
Right.
I feel like I'm not overpowered by my learning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it would seem that there are in between cases, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, what else? Yeah, Fega?
So I have two questions. So first, I'm just wondering about the relevance in the pasuk where it says the things that your eyes saw.
Okay, good.
So like
okay,
a question on that.
Let me expand on that question. I was hoping someone would ask it. I didn't present this l'chatchila. So here's the context. Okay, this is in Moshe Rabbeinu's speech, his first speech, I think, or maybe second speech, I can't remember, in Dvarim chapter 4. So he's this is after the famous pasuk of the nations will hear about all the chukim and say Rak am chacham v'nam v'nagoy v'rozeh. Okay, and no nation has a God who's so close to it. Okay, then he says Rak yisham l'cha shmor nafshcha me'od. Only be very careful and guard your soul exceedingly, pen tishchach as dvarim asher b'ra minecha, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw, ufen yisur milvavecha kol yimei chayecha, and lest you remove them from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and your children's children. Okay, what is it that you're supposed to not forget? The day that the day that you stood before Hashem your God at Horeb, at Sinai. When God said to me, to Moshe, gather to me the people of Ashmiam Estabarai, I will make my words heard to them. So that they'll learn to fear me all the days, that they are living on the land, and their children they will teach. So the thing you're not supposed to forget is Har Sinai, and that's the thing that your eyes saw, okay? And this is pshat, okay? Like Rabag here says, Haratum zeh sheyishmeru nafsham shelo yishkachu mamad har Sinai. You should not forget Mamad Har Sinai because that's the basis of the whole thing. That's what testifies to the fact that the Torah is given from Hashem. Ramban learns this as though it is los aseh, to forget Torah, to forget Har Sinai. So the question here is, what does the pasuk have to do with Rabbi Meir's idea? Okay, the pasuk is warning us not to forget the event at Har Sinai. Okay, not warning us to forget our learning, right? And you could conceivably forget your learning and still remember that God gave the Torah at Sinai, right? So like it doesn't jive. Okay. Fega, what was your second question?
Well, forgetting is like an active, that's an active activity of the brain. And it's natural, and it's like a system that was built into humans. So why is it so bad? It's like,
okay,
it's not it.
Okay, all right, good. So this is exactly why, I don't know if you saw in the shiur description, we're going to actually try to do 2 mishnayos tonight. Okay, this one and then one in chapter 5, which is about forgetting. Okay, and hold on just 1 second here. I'm actually going to make an executive decision in order to emphasize that this next mishnah is secondary. I'm going to just quote that mishnah, okay, really quickly. So this is in Pirkei Avos 5:12. Arba midos b'talmidim. There are 4 characteristics among talmidim. Maher lishmoa umaher la'abed. So it literally means quick to hear and quick to lose. But I translate as quick to understand, because I don't think you could hear quickly. I think that's dependent on someone's, speech. So it must mean understand. And quick to forget. Yatsa schar b'hafseda. His reward is canceled out by his loss. Okay, meaning that like you gained, but then it's offset by the loss. Kasha lishmoa v'kasha la'abed, slow to understand. Okay, literally difficult in understanding. V'kasha la'abed, and difficult to forget, and slow to forget. His loss is canceled out by his reward. Maher lishmoa v'kasha la'abed, quick to understand and slow to forget. Chacham, that's a person's wise. And then kasha lishmoa maher la'abed v'zeh like ra. Slow to understand and quick to forget. This is a bad portion. Now, if you look in Pirkei Avos chapter 5, there's a whole genre of these statements, and usually it'll say, about one of them, this person's a chassid and this person's a rasha. Okay, but here, almost all the mefarshim, if not all of them, point out it doesn't say that. It says chacham, it doesn't say chassid because this is about intellectual stuff, but it doesn't say that this 4th person is a rasha. It says zeh chelek ra. This is a bad portion. Okay, why does it say that? He says because, like the Rambam says, this is not one of the virtues. Sorry, it's not in his control whether he forgets. Okay, because it's not possible to acquire the virtue of being able to remember stuff well. Or like Rבינו Yonah says, I'm not going to spoil the whole Rבינו Yonah. He says, the reason why this mission doesn't mention chassid and a rasha, there's no righteousness and wickedness in here. A person's understanding is from Hashem, like the philosophers say, habina matana, understanding is a gift. I've never heard a philosopher say that, but that's what he says. Or the Meiri who says that it doesn't say, it says chelek ra, ve'in roy lomar be'elu chassid v'rasha shekol elohim by mitzad hachanos ativios. All of these are just natural dispositions. So the question is, I'm just kind of amplifying Vega's question here, which is, hold on. Oh, this is the wrong one. Which is, it's only human to forget, right? What if we have a bad memory, right? Yeah, what are we supposed to do? Okay, that's like the way I'm framing the question. Okay, tomorrow.
I guess just elaborating on that question or like clarifying it. what is the case that makes you mischayev b'nafsho, whatever that means here?
Right.
Like, because if it is, like, I think this is the same question. Like, if it is that you literally forget anything, then that's going to be pretty
right.
impossible to
high
avoid.
bar. Right. So
Yeah.
I just added on to question number 2. What scenario is this where you sin remove it from your heart? Yeah, Alex.
I'm curious if the like specific thing that's forgotten matters. Like, does it matter if it's like the main point of your learning or like a tangent, like a secondary thing? Like,
Okay.
is it dependent on that?
Yeah, let's see here. So does it matter what from your learning you are forgetting? Okay, right. Like it does seem like there, if you forget, the names of Reuven's children versus if you forget Hashem Echad, I would think that one is more important than the other. Right. So it's weird to say that you're just like liable across the board. Yeah. Seems like some things are more important than others. Okay. Lauren?
I don't know if this is a question that should be written down, but because you said that some say that this is a continuation of the last mishnah,
yeah.
but does that mean that's a different idea, or is this like
Okay.
the same idea?
So
because it sounds like it's a different idea.
Okay.
So how is it related to
interesting,
the first
okay.
idea?
So I that's exactly why I began this year by reviewing the last one, because I actually was going to ask it from the other standpoint, which is, can you say kal v'chomer? Then this is true. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean. So let me just go back to the last one. So in other words, like this. I mean, it's not a strict kal v'chomer, but like if I am in the middle of learning, okay, and I just stop momentarily to say, oh, what a beautiful tree. If I'm chayev for my soul for that, certainly if I sit down and forget my learning, right? Like it seems to follow from that, and especially if you say it's the same thing, but I'm going to ask the question in a more open-ended way, which is, what is the relationship between this mishnah and the previous one? Okay. Can't you infer this from the last one? Okay. Alexander, is that your hand from last time, or is this a new question?
Oh, I just forgot to put it
Okay,
down.
that's fine.
Sorry.
Yeah, Tamar?
I was on mute, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I guess this is dependent on whether or not it's a continuation, but I think you could ask whether this is the same mischayev b'nafsho as last time.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good question. That was a good question. Okay. And I'm gonna include that here. Okay. Is this the same mischayev b'nafsho from last time? By the way, just to clarify here, not to clarify, just to support this, the Rashbat, I believe, in the last Mishnah says his argument that this is a continuation is that Rabbi Dostai, I think Rabbi Dostai did not chronologically come after Rabbi Shimon, but the editor of the Mishnah, I don't know, Rabbi Nasi, juxtaposed the two Mishnayos because of the common theme. Okay, so that's an argument for that. Yeah, Lauren?
Just to like elaborate on that last question, like also like what's the chiddush here of this idea?
Right.
Like if it's the kal v'chomer, then and maybe also like the question we always ask, what's the, I don't know if it's a practical relevance or how is this for a chassid lead to perfection?
Right. So who is the audience? Oh, now that we did our thing last time from Moshe Halbertal, we can ask, we can modify our usual question, which is, to what extent is this practically relevant only to an aspiring chassid? Okay. And then what is the non-chassid supposed to gain from this in terms of their image of the perfected Torah individual? And that's a Halbertalian question. Okay. I feel like those are all of our questions. So let me do this. We can always ask more questions. I'm going to do what I usually do and post this in the chat so you can have the text. Oh, no, it doesn't fit. Okay, hold on. Okay, post this in the chat. That's the Hebrew. And this is the English. And then I will get the questions on the screen. Oh, we can fit them all on the screen this time, maybe. Okay. Does anyone have any answers or approaches here? Yeah.
I was thinking maybe being overpowered by your learning means like you're continually learning. So like the new stuff that you learn overtakes the old and you forget
that's
that
interesting.
way.
Okay, that is interesting. Like you're saying as part of like a natural process of okay, yeah, that's interesting. I'm just laughing. Okay, yeah, whatever. I'm laughing because I experienced that in a very real way. That in certain areas, like when I first started learning Torah, I know there's no such thing as like a photographic memory. I had like a very, very good memory for details. And I feel like the meter just like got filled up. And then like other stuff, like after that, my memory is not as good. But that's not what you're talking about. That was just my association. Okay, that's a good possibility. And that would fit with the lashon of overpowered. Yeah, Tamar?
I would take a guess at trying to explain what it means to, I guess the relationship between the pasuk and the forgetting.
Okay.
And kind of also maybe relates to the last mishnah, which would be that somehow the forgetting is coming from a like deprioritizing
Okay.
Torah, which I feel like you could say is like forgetting Sinai in some way. It's a little bit like you have to work it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good approach. By the way, I did not, it is possible there's one out there. I did not find anyone who addressed that question. Okay. So like, to my mind, it gives me a little bit more leeway. Okay. So, okay. That's a good, good move. All right, anyone else have any insights? Okay. I think what we're going to do, if no one has anything right away, just in the interest of my voice not totally giving out by the middle of the shiur, let's go over the ideas that I found in the Mefarshim. We're only going to do 2 Mefarshim, and then we're going to move on to that other Mishnah. Okay. So we're going to start with the Meiri because he's the most difficult, and he's the most difficult because he doesn't seem to add anything new to what he said last time. Okay. So here's Meiri. You can see it very, very short here. Okay. So Meiri says, Kolomar, im shocheach hadvarim machmas ones o machmas koshi ha'inyan v'dakuso. If you forget the learning due to ones, okay. So ones, I think, will covers all the things that are not in your control. Okay. And if you look through the Mefarshim, you'll find them give examples. For example, like one is old age. Another is just natural forgetting, like you're going to forget some stuff, like we've been saying. So Ones covers that whole thing, which I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief there. Or he says because of the difficulty of the ideas and the subtlety of it. Okay, so that's another thing, is that certain areas are just so difficult or minute. Like let's say like in if you've learned I don't know, the most technical areas of halacha, like in Zvachim or in Tuma V'Tara, or even in certain areas of Kashrus, there's just a ton of detail, and then other areas, like there's a lot of cheshbon, there's a lot of like holding in your mind all of the different opinions, and in other areas, it's this concepts are slippery, so all of those are lumped under your learning overpowers you, okay? But then he says, so then that kind of raises the question, then strengthens this question, well, what does it mean then to sit and forget it? So he says, due to his negligence, due to his interrupting from learning, and his involvement in some temporal needs which are not absolutely necessary. Okay, so the difficulty, so he's saying sitting and forgetting it means that you forgot because you interrupted your learning to be involved in something that is a temporal need that you don't really need to do. Now that's the exact same phrasing that he used in 3:9 about the tree. He said, let's just read his actual lashon again. You shouldn't interrupt from your Torah. L'tzorech iske hazman, for some temporal need, rak lefi hatzorech ha'hechrachi, unless it is an absolute need. Okay, so it sounds like what he's saying is that if you do that, okay, if you interrupt for some need that is not an absolute necessity, and you forget Torah because of that, then you're liable for your soul. So this just strengthens our question, which is, what's the relationship between these two mishnayos? I mean, or what's the chiddush, like the way Lawrence said it, right? It sounds like he's just saying, yeah, and this follows from that, So the question is, what is the chiddush here? Can we answer that? And this is also why I review the Meiri. Yeah, Lauren.
Maybe he's saying like another consequence is that you're going to also forget the Torah of interrupting, I guess.
Okay.
Kind of a consequence of interrupting.
Okay, that's a good interpretation, right? So there's two consequences. One is that you are giving in. So the last mishnah was saying you're giving into the part of yourself that wants to cast off the yoke of Torah. That itself is bad. That's a moral corruption. Okay. And because you're giving into that, it's like you're someone who's not involved in Torah at all. That's how you should view it. And you're also going to lose what you have gained. Okay. Which is another liability for your soul. Okay. That's a good approach. I would accept that, even though I have a different approach.
Maybe it's like two different parts of learning. So the first mishnah is while you're learning, you are not focusing. And that's bad, because you should be when you're engaged in the pursuit of Torah, you should be completely focused on that. And then maybe you would think but if you put in your time and you really sit and concentrate, then you did it, check mark. And this is saying that's not how it works. You need to also hold on to it afterwards.
Okay, so how are you? I like the approach you're taking, which is it's the two different kinds of interruption and distraction from your Torah. So how are you taking this line here of just I'm I just missed how are you connecting that to the just to state the chiddush one more time from here.
Okay, did not address that bit.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Just the general direction to take is that the first mishnah is while you are learning, you're not focusing.
Yeah.
And then you might be that's sufficient. If you focus, then that's sufficient.
Right.
And the after effects sort of don't matter. And this is if you learn and then you cast that away, then that's also just as bad as not actually learning.
I took the same approach that you did, but I'm gonna just I took the exact same approach for the previous mishnah, but I'm gonna take a different approach for this mishnah. Anyone else want to volunteer an answer? Okay, so the way I think of it here is that there's two types of hafsaka. There's two types of interruption of your learning in order to be involved in the tzorech hazman. The first type is incidental, which means that you're involved in learning, whether, like Meiri said, whether Bekius or casually, and you allow yourself to get distracted by things that are not really necessary. Okay. The other type of hafsaka is where you, for lack of a better term, schedule in a time and energy suck, okay, that is not necessary. All right. And an example of this, which either you can all relate to now or in the recent past, I think there is a thing where when you are taking when you're in college, there are certain classes that you have to take no matter what. But then there are other classes where you can choose to take a class that is going to involve a tremendous commitment of time and energy, and that will compromise your ability to be involved in learning. Okay, so what this is saying is, I think that's what this is saying, that if you make a commitment, which essentially is committing to a tzorech hazman bezulas ha'hechreach, a temporal need that is not really necessary, and that causes you to forget, that's a different type of liability, and it's also a different type of pitfall. And I think that's why he uses the verb hisasko. You like become involved or occupied with it, which he did not use in the previous mishnah. In the previous mishnah, he just said lifsok midivrei Torah l'tzorech iskei hazman. That's an incidental thing. Okay, so in other words, you have to be on guard. The practical takeaway here is you have to be on guard against two types of interruptions. One is while you are learning, stay focused and don't let yourself be sidetracked. And the other is in terms of how you set up your life, in terms of what activities or commitments you make. Be careful to not make a commitment to something which is an unnecessary commitment that is going to draw you away from Torah. And those are two categorical things you need to be aware of. And I think there are people who have set up their lives to where they're always involved in learning, but they get distracted a lot while they're learning. Okay, so they're fulfilling they're fulfilling the second mishnah, but violating the first one. And then there are people who are very good at being hyper focused, but they choose things to focus on that are wastes of time, that are taking away valuable learning time, which causes them to neglect their Torah and forget that. And that's why I think both of them need to be stated explicitly. Yeah, Tamar?
I think this is really interesting. And I think it's really interesting that if these are the two ideas that he's bringing out, that he's using almost the same language, because they feel like very different things.
Right. Right. I think that's interesting as well. But I think that you can make the argument that is why he uses the same language, because the danger is the same, right? In other words, at the end of the day, all you have is time, right? What does Gandalf say? I've quoted this many times. All we have to do. Wait, what is it? This is gonna bother me. Hold on. I gotta look it up. You can't misquote Gandalf. I've forgotten Gandalf. Gandalf.
Yosef says, all we have are the days that are given to us.
Yosef said, oh, okay, all we have to decide. Wait.
I just asked Yosef, my resident Lord of the Rings expert.
Okay, that's good. So in the movie quote, I don't know about I don't know if it's in the same as the book. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. But the same sentiment. Okay, right. So in that sense, the misuse of time is Mishlei Podcast. And so I think that is being underscored by framing it in the same way, even though the nature of the mistake is different. That's how I put it.
I was wondering if you could say that the nature of the mistake is at least like overlapping, in that you're maybe like overestimating the importance of these iskei zman or something like that. That
could very well be. That's a good point also, right? And I think the Meiri would say that, right? And probably the Abrabnel would also say that. Okay, good. Okay, are we ready to go on to the Rביnu Yonah? Okay, now I expected the Rביnu Yonah to take the approach of continuing what he said in the last mishnah, because the last mishnah, he put the emphasis on the yira that you have to have when you learn Torah. And we saw in the pasuk in Dvarim, it says explicitly that the reason why God gathered us at Sinai is asher yilmadun liyira osi, is to learn to fear me. So I was like, okay, Rביnu Yonah is going to take the same approach. Turns out he takes a completely different approach. Okay, so what does he say? He says, by the way, tell me if my audio is getting messed up, because my video is getting messed up. And I'm sensing my computer is slow for some reason. Okay. So he says, I think his gear says the same. Okay. Asher lo nasan bil. So what does he mean? Why are you crying for your soul? Asher lo nasan bil vavo lemor ki hashichacha metzuya b'bnei adam. This person did not take it to heart to say that forgetfulness is common among people. Okay. He should have reviewed the halacha many times, and thought about it all day and all night, until it would be impossible for it to be removed from his heart. But he did not do this. So he's liable for his soul. Why? Because he will come to paskin based on his memory. V'yomar, and he'll say, this is what my Rebbe told me. V'yesor hamutar v'yatir ha'aser, and he will prohibit the permitted and permit the prohibited. V'nimtzas takala ba al yado, and there will be some mishap that will come about through his psak. V'nikra poshea, and he is called negligent. Talmud Olazadam, because this is a quoting from another Chazal, that unintentional errors in learning in matters of psak are counted as intentional errors. Okay, so that's that. Hold on to that for 1 second. He says this does not apply if you're overpowered by your learning. So what does that mean? He says im if you forget due to your old age or due to some thing beyond your control, then the Torah says you're pater. Okay, so what is the Rabbeinu Yonah's emphasis in contrast to the Meiri? What's the punchline according to him? Yeah.
I guess like the practicality of poskening.
Exactly, right? So he is, I guess, returning to an old theme in Pirkei Avos, which is that, like the Rambam said, that Pirkei Avos is written primarily for dayanim, for judges. Okay, that's why in the Mishnayos it's in Seder Nezikin. Let me just show you where it is. Actually, I think it might be disputed where in Pirkei Avos it is. Give me 1 second here. Slow internet. Also, this is good in case you don't know this, how to find Pirkei Avos. So in Shas, let's wait till it comes up. Oh, so slow. It's in Seder Nezikin. And okay, yeah, I think sometimes it's before Avodah Zarah, sometimes it's afterwards. But it's in the stuff that deals with the so you have Sanhedrin, which is for the judges. Makos is punishments that they do. Shavuos is here because the oaths that they administer. Adios because of the witnesses that have to testify. Avodah Zarah because of the cases involving Avodah Zarah. And then Horios is about matters of psak and about like compromise and stuff. So Avos is here because it pertains to matters of the judiciary. Okay, so it seems like that's the direction Rabbeinu Yonah is taking. And furthermore, he's, interestingly enough, not saying that you're liable for the forgetting itself. You're liable for the consequences of the forgetting, which is a very interesting. Okay, so the question is, it seems pretty straightforward, right? But the question is, I guess, why is it that you are mischayev b'nafsho? Like, why such a, again, still seems like hyperbole. Why are you liable for your life, or why your soul? And furthermore, again, we haven't answered the question of why connected back to Har Sinai, and forgetting the things that your eyes saw. Yeah, Alex.
Well, in terms of the poskening, you'll end up doing something wrong, and then potentially you could end up doing avodah zarah, similar to how people did at Har Sinai.
Okay, so that's definitely true. Just to clarify, though, I think the primary psak here that we're talking about is for other people, and the reason why is, first of all, that's the lashon he uses. He says you'll prohibit the where it's permitted, and he says to lahoros is to like instruct others in halacha, but the noteworthy thing here is he does not, what you're saying is true. He doesn't say you will make a halachic mistake in your own halachic practice. So it sounds like we're worried that he's going to like commit an error that will be spread to many other people. So I have a different answer. Okay, and again, I did not find an answer to the question about the Sinai thing. So this is my answer, okay, which is that the whole purpose of God giving the Torah at Sinai is so that we implement it correctly, okay? And if you don't, if you forget the psak and you make a mistake in how to implement it, then in a sense, it's as if you fumbled and dropped the revelation at Har Sinai, like Sinai was for naught, okay? And I'll give you a mashal here, okay? Let's say like, parental mashals are easy, okay? Let's say like your mom like lectures you, okay, about a certain thing that she doesn't want you to do, okay? And then let's say you go out and you do it, and then you come back and then she like gets all mad and says, don't you remember the talk that we had? And you say, yeah. And she says, what did I tell you? And you say, I have no clue. So she would say, well, then you didn't remember the talk that we had. Like, yeah, sure, you remembered that we talked, but the whole point of having the talk was so that you would implement what I told you, you know? So similarly, if God gives you these halachos at Sinai and you are, as a human being, don't take into account the fact that you're going to forget stuff and you don't have proper maintenance of this, and you forget it and you give an erroneous psak, and as a result of that, then people are not keeping Torah properly. So then you have forgotten the revelation at Sinai. You know, God did this one-time revelation where he gave you his halachos and then you messed it up, you know? So it still is hyperbole, but it's also literally true that like you've dropped the, you've like ceased the transmission from Sinai, which is a pretty big deal, okay? And you might say, well, there are other people, but yeah, I mean, what are the other people saying though? Like if everyone forgets this, I mean, you saw what happened with Torah, well, you didn't see what happened with Torah Peh, but Torah Peh almost got forgotten to the point where these things need to be written down. So like the whole thing can be lost due to, you know, what is the quote? No snowflake blames itself for the avalanche, you know? Like all it takes is everyone not keeping track of their memory, not being vigilant, and then everyone ends up forgetting everything. Okay, that's my understanding of Rביnu Yonah. Any questions or comments?
Can I suggest
Sure.
maybe an addition or maybe a slightly different?
Definitely, sure.
Okay. So like it's also possible that like the forgetting Har Sinai, so like that was like God himself telling us like these laws. So not just like your stam like system that you gotta remember, like your regular Joe laws.
Okay.
And like maybe like when you forget, you're like treating it just like your regular run-of-the-mill stuff that you need that you learn and you sort of implement and you sort of forget. But like if you forget, like that means that like you're not remembering like the gravity of what happened. Like these are God's laws.
Right. Okay, that's good. That's along the lines of what Tamar suggested, to connect this Rביnu Yonah with the last one, which is in the last one, he emphasized the fear and the awe that you should have when you learn Torah. And what Dvor is saying is that to forget this is not just the same thing as forgetting a recipe, right? This is forgetting what God himself gave you, that, you know, you know, like, you know, whatever the thing says in Shofros, you know, wait, do I have them also right here? Hold on. Oh man, it's a slichos, it's not a machzor. Anyway, God spoke to you from heaven and gave you these laws. And if you had the proper awe, you would remember it, you know, to a T. But so this is also indicative of like a moral failing in terms of the way that your lack of reverence for Torah. Okay, good. That's a good addition. Okay. Speaking of forgetting, let's now go on to this mishnah here, because the question here, okay, just to convert my observation from before into a question. It's very nice that these are 4 different characteristics among students, okay? The problem, though, is Pirkei Avos is an ethical treatise, which is teaching us how to have good midos, okay? So if this is not in your control, ultimately, at the end of the day, we can't control. Some people are just quicker at understanding than others. Some people have better memories than others, okay? So what are we supposed to do with this mishnah, all right? Like, how do we implement this practically? What do you say about that? I'm going to get a cough drop. I'll be right back while you think. I have to say, by the way, I got to tell you a mistake. So when I was a little kid, I would always have cough drops when I was sick. My mom would give me cough drops. And for some reason, I associated the sensory experience of having cough drops with being sick. And I think for that reason, once I moved away from home, like when I was 18, I never bought cough drops again. And it wasn't even an intentional decision. It just was not in my repertoire. So yes, last night when I gave shiur, after shiur, Yaakov Eiferman said, would you like cough drops? And I said, whatever, sure. And he gave it to me. And cough drops are amazing. Like, how could I have not known about the greatness of cough drops? Like, they actually like alleviate the pain in your throat. So that was just a mistake of just getting stuck in like this associative mode where I just ruled out an entire like invention because of childhood associations. So don't make that mistake. Yeah, tomorrow.
Okay, I had a thought for this mishnah, but I feel like it's probably not where we're trying to go with this. In terms of practicality, the way that I could see this being practical is as a teacher.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, go on.
I guess like you might teach your students differently if you know that these are categories, and maybe you would try and like help them work with their types.
That's a very good answer. I did not see that in the Mefarshim, but that's a very good answer, because as a teacher, I can say that like it is very easy. I was I'm not a chacham, but by this definition, I was a chacham, and then I was quick to understand in high school, and easy to remember. And sometimes it's when I first started teaching, it was difficult for me to adjust to the fact that not all students have minds like that. So I think that's great application. Yeah, Alex. Or not? Okay, I guess not. Okay. So speaking
I didn't realize I was muted.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, why are you interrupting? I was saying before I realized I was not heard. You could potentially have it applied to your own learning. That way you could find out how you best learn, so as to get potentially encouraged, or to, instead of being discouraged, like even at the worst where like you're slow to understand and quick to forget, it's not like you're a terrible person, it's not the best quality, but there are ways maybe you could potentially course correct within these categories.
Okay. So that is the approach that the Rabbeinu Yonah takes, which is the one we're going to take. Okay, so let me tell you what the Rabbeinu Yonah is going to do before we read him. Is he's going to take each of these things and then give almost like a little pep talk, okay, about how this person can convert their state, like what the person who's in the state needs to do or needs to think in order to have the best relationship with their learning. Okay. And I happen to have taught this in high school, so I have a PowerPoint with the translation already on it. Makes it easier here. Okay. So, so I even wrote that out. Rabbeinu Yonah's general approach: each type of student might make an excuse for slacking off in his or her learning, and the Mishnah provides the student with a reason why his or her learning is still valuable. So the first one, quick to understand and quick to forget. His reward is offset by his loss. So Rabbeinu Yonah says his loss is tremendous. Since he forgets his learning, what benefit is there in his knowledge? Because he understands things quickly. I think if he understands things quickly, since he will forget everything from his mind. So in other words, yeah, fine, he understands things quickly, but if he's forgetting everything, so then what's the point? So Rabbeinu Yonah answers, he says, Vim kolzeh lo yirape yadav mililmod. Nevertheless, he should not be lax in his learning, because he will have reward in exchange for his service. He's doing the work of Hashem, and he's toiling in it all day long. And then he says, this can be compared to a bucket with a hole, as was written above. Now, I did not find the reference that he was saying when I looked for it today, but I seem to recall the reference was some midrash that says something like this. There are two guys who are both hired by a owner of a well, who says, take these buckets and fill them up and dump them into this trough of water, and I'll pay you by the hour. So the guys start bucketing the water, and they realize that the buckets are full of holes. And by the time they get to the trough, then there's very little water that's there. Okay. So one of the guys says, okay, forget this. Like, I'm not accomplishing anything anyway. And he gives up. The other guy says, yeah, I'm not accomplishing anything, but the job that I'm being paid for is to take the bucket with the hole and to dump it in the thing. And I'm still going to get paid. Okay. So I think it could be that I'm misremembering it, which is ironic given what we just said, but I couldn't find it. So I couldn't access it. Okay. So the question though is like, what is Rביnu Yonah getting at? Because you would think that like he himself acknowledges, the main benefit you get is the knowledge itself. And this guy is not retaining the knowledge. So what does he mean that he's getting reward in exchange for his service? Now, right away, I'm going to rule out a sort of like superficial answer. You could just say simply, oh, you're doing a mitzvah of learning and you're going to get a reward in Olam Haba. Yeah, that's true. But this is Pirkei Avos. We're trying to understand how to perfect ourselves. So what idea can we get that is actually like an accessible idea that gives us insight into character development somehow? So what do you say? Yeah, tomorrow.
I can think of like a couple of things. I mean, one thing I think is that if you, I don't know what I don't know if it's assumed that he's learning like halacha and psak, or if we're not saying that, but
I think this is all learning.
All learning, yeah, because I think like sometimes you learn something and it affects you, and then you can't say it over later maybe, but like you still got something out of it.
Yeah.
So I think that's the main thing, and maybe also he's getting like skills and developing as a learner, even if he's forgetting the details.
Okay, good. So let me comment on both of those, and then I'll call on Alex after that. So the thing that comes to my mind, and the person who fits in this category, is Rabbi Moskowitz. So Rabbi Moskowitz would always say that he has a horrible memory, and it was true that he could teach us, and we could go over an idea in Mishlei, and then like a couple days later, we'll bring it up, and he will not remember it, and he would just, he just has bad memory. And in fact, Rabbi Moskowitz said, kind of in line with the other Rביnu Yonah, Rabbi Moskowitz used to want to be, when he was in yeshiva, he used to want to be a posek, and eventually he came to terms with the fact that he just doesn't have the memory to be able to do that. Okay, so, but one thing Rabbi Moskowitz always told us is, he said, if you're learning and you see something clearly, if you see the idea clearly, even just once, then it's going to affect your soul. And he would never really spell out what he meant by it'll affect your soul. But my understanding of that is that even though you won't be able to remember the idea in a like verbal sense or in a theoretical sense, the idea still impacts who you become as a person. Okay. And that's certainly true in ideas of like Mishlei and Pirkei Avos and Tehillim and Hashkafa, but even in areas of halacha, that like you're going to internalize certain things that will affect the way that it'll perfect you, and that's the reward you're getting for your service, even if you forget the ideas. The second thing that Tamar said was with the skills is that there is a certain type of, for lack of a better term, the personality or the persona or the lifestyle of a Talmid Chachamim, right? Someone who is like devoted to learning, and you still are cultivating that. You're cultivating an attachment to learning that even if you don't remember the ideas, being attached to learning is a good, insofar as you're involved in Chachmas Hashem and you're having Avos Hashem and Yiras Hashem, and you're not involved in other pursuits, and that is still valuable in its own right, even if you forget the content. Okay, Alex.
The ideas I had were very similar. Sure. But I was thinking specifically by continuing to learn, you're building that kind of discipline that keeps you on a good path, even if you don't specifically remember.
All right, good. I like that also. Yeah, Feiga.
Yeah, so I had a similar idea about how like just knowing that you're actively doing the right thing is just, I think that builds character.
Okay. Yeah.
And another thing, I think that like a big positive to learning in this situation is that they're taking control and they're recognizing that like of their own learning. Like it's very easy to say like, oh, why should I learn? Like there's no benefit, but that kind of is just more passive. And like, I think this is just a lot like very proactive, and also like it just gives more control to the learner.
Okay, good. I mean, what it sounds like you're describing, I know you're not using these phrases, but the way I'm hearing it is like this person is living a life of purpose and meaning. They have a value system and they are committing themselves to that value system. And that's it's going to enrich their life and give them a sense of meaning and an activity rather than passivity. So I think that is a good quality. Yeah, Yael?
So given all these answers, why does it say that his reward is offset by his loss? Because it sounds like that wouldn't be the case.
Right. Yeah, you can ask that on all of the Rambam Yonah here. It is funny. If I remember correctly, I did not research this mishnah tonight. I researched this when I taught it back in 2018. But I remember when I was reading it, I was disturbed that all the other Mefarshim brought up the fact that these are things that are not in your control. But Rabbeinu Yonah is the only one who like gives us something practical to work with, So my guess is that the other Mefarshim are learning it as though the mishnah is about something else. Let's say like what Tamar said about like for teachers or something like that. And it's making the point that like some students are going to be more cut out for success than others. But Rabbeinu Yonah is swooping in and saying, but don't give up. Like don't use this as an excuse for being lax in your learning. And here's why. So in other words, this might be more Rabbeinu Yonah's own like supplementary musar rather than what the mishnah is saying. The mishnah might be speaking from a strictly results-oriented perspective, because that's definitely what it seems like. Yeah, Tamar.
When it says this yatsa scharo behefsedo, I guess you translate it as offset. Does it mean like, is it saying that it's canceled out? I know that's what you're just talking about. But...
Well, literally, it's his reward leaves with its loss, or with his loss. So
okay, so it's not obvious what the relationship is.
Yeah. And I think I got this translation from Art Scroll, and then in the one on the Word document that I translated, it's like it cancels out, because I think that's like how we would say it. But yeah, you can interpret it in different ways. Okay, let's go into the second one. Slow to learn and slow to forget. His loss is offset by his reward. So he says, Shehasachar meruba, his reward is abundant. Kimash yafsid bekoshi shmuaso uvelibo hakasha belimut, because whatever he loses due to his slowness and understanding and his mind that has difficulty with learning, yitra harbe, he will toil a lot, ad yedav yavin advar, until he understands and knows the ideas. And afterwards, lo yishakachu mipiv, it will not be forgotten from his mouth. Uveze yeda harbe ma'od, and through this he will come to know much. Both of these people have great reward for their learning. So he doesn't explicitly state the pep talk here, but the pep talk is keep at it, because slow and steady wins the race, to quote the tortoise and the hare. Okay. So I will give another example of this from my own learning. So just reminder of my biography here. So I started learning in 11th grade, and that's when I really learned like like how to read Hebrew and started my Jewish education. And so by the time I got to yeshiva, my first year of yeshiva, I still was new to learning, and a lot of the guys in my group were much more advanced than I was. And so it was a little discouraging at times, and because everyone was progressing faster than I was. So what I did was one of my role models who I looked up to, still look up to, but at the time, one of my role models who I looked up to the most was Rabbi Fox, because Rabbi Fox was the clearest thinker that I knew. And the clarity was transmitted to his students because in his Gemara class in high school, he would do oral quizzes, and he would quiz you and make sure that you knew it with absolute clarity. So what I did in order to deal with my own self-esteem issues in my first year in yeshiva, when I saw everyone progressing faster than I would, I said, okay, I'm just going to focus on one thing, which is everything I learn, I'm going to try to get as clear as I can. And I'm going to use Rabbi Fox as like the barometer. I'm going to pretend Rabbi Fox is quizzing me and asking me questions about it. And I need to be able to meet that standard of clarity. And so I progressed in a much more deliberate fashion, slowly and steadily, but that led to great accumulation over time and great clarity as well. So like that's what I associated to when I saw this, because I was slow to understand, but I was also slow to forget. So I did retain stuff. So I would put myself in this category here. Okay. For learning. I mentioned earlier this year in high school, for other subjects, I was in the third category, but for Torah, it was slow to understand and slow to forget. Okay. Anyone have any other comments on this one or questions? I think this one's pretty straightforward. Okay, but the thing, the pep talk is you got to work a lot, right? This person's gonna have to put in a lot more work. Oh, by the way, another example of this is, okay, there's this English book that Art Scroll published called it was based on a Hebrew book, but the English one's called My Uncle the Nitziv. So I think this was about the Nitziv himself and not about the author, but I think the Nitziv, who is regarded as like a great, genius, his greatness was the fact that he was not a genius, and he made himself great in Torah by working really hard. A lot of the people who are great in Torah are natural geniuses. Not to say that they didn't work hard, but the Nitziv, I think, said that he had to work extremely hard to get there. So that's an inspiring story if you ever get the chance to read it. Okay, number 3, the best portion: quick to understand and slow to forget. He is wise. But now Rambam Yona says, and this is why I chose this to do tonight. He says, "V'im kol zeh," despite this, Yachzor ha'alachos harbe pamim. You should review the laws a lot. V'lo yismach b'haz karas. I think that's a typo. B'haz karaso. He should not rely on his memory. Ki lo la'adam yicholes lizkor la'olam. Imlo b'hasmadas chazaras hadvarim uvehalosam alibo tami. No human has the ability to always remember without constant review of the ideas and bringing them to his mind constantly. Kilcho enosh teva hashechacha, because every person by nature forgets. And what can a person remember his learning after forgetting it? In other words, if you've forgotten it, then it's not going to be in your mind. Like someone who plants seeds but doesn't harvest. Okay, so that dovetails with what we saw, which is that even if you have the best understanding, the best memory, you still are prone to forgetting. And in fact, here your chachma is a liability, because you will tell yourself, oh, I don't need to review because I'm so smart. But that's exactly where you're going to fall into the trap. Okay. And in fact, you're also going to be, you could argue that people who are very smart, they're going to learn a lot more, and there's a lot more to forget. Okay. So if you're in this boat, you need to take precautions to review. That could mean, for example, let's say you have 3 hours of the day to learn. Okay. So it's tempting to want to use all 3 hours to learn new stuff, but perhaps it would be better for you to use 2 hours to learn new stuff and 1 hour to review, and especially when you're in yeshiva or seminary, review is, when you have much more time available, review is is critical. But even when you're in a more, later point in your life, then you should definitely review. And I'm going to give another example for myself here, which I wish I did, and I still technically I could do. So when I taught Mishlei in high school, I had this great habit of every time I learned taught a Mishlei idea, in my own notes, I would write down a 4-sentence summary. So I had this whole trove of 4-sentence summaries. And then when I came to yeshiva and started giving Mishlei shiurim 5 days a week, then I started to keep 4-sentence summaries of every idea I taught. But what happened, and I excuse myself for this for the first year, is I just didn't have time to do that. I was just teaching, too many classes. But I regret not coming up with some system to be able to easily review my ideas, because there's so many Mishlei Pesukim that I've taught that I just don't remember now. So I should take my own advice here and do something to remember it. Or another example of this is the Rambam. The Rambam, primary reason the Rambam wrote the Mishnah Torah was for Klal Yisrael, but he says that one of the reasons he wrote the Mishnah Torah is so he could remember halacha in his old age, because he knew that he's going to forget stuff, forgetting all of halacha for all Torah mitzvos. And so he says that that's one of the reasons he wrote it. And he also says he regrets not writing a companion volume with all the sources for all the halachas of the Mishnah Torah, because he did forget the sources for certain things. Okay, any questions or comments here? Okay, last one and the most difficult one. Slow to understand and quick to forget. This is a bad portion. V'im kozeh, despite all this, lo yaniach mililmo, he should not stop learning. Ki sachar hatoreach biyado, he has the reward for toil in his hand. V'hahergel al kol panim yisakin es libo, and habit will ultimately fix his mind. Im advim harbeh, whether a little or a lot, lefi mashu, based on who he is. Okay, and then Rambam Yonah makes the point which we read earlier, which is that it doesn't use wicked and pious here because this is not in your control. Okay, so what is he saying about this guy? Sounds similar to what he said for the first guy. First guy was, despite all this, he shouldn't be lax in his learning because he has the reward for his avoda. Here he says the reward for his toil is in his hand, and habit will ultimately fix his mind or improve his mind, might be a better way to translate it, whether a lot or a little based on who he is. So what's Rambam Yonah's point here? I'll be right back. I can hear you. I just gotta get something. Yeah. What do you say? Yeah, tomorrow.
I'm just noticing, I think this word of like Torah is for the, I think it's only for the slow to understand.
I think he also uses it for the,
you're right.
Yeah. Slow to understand. Yeah. Yeah. He will toil a lot. Right. He uses it for both slow to understands. That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like he's saying that this isn't like a fixed condition entirely. Like there's some improvement to be made. And I guess even if not, the toil in itself is still rewarded.
Okay, good. So I think I'm going to just go in the opposite order. So I think the toil for the reward, I think is similar to the points we made for the first person. I don't know why he says, why he emphasizes in exchange for his service, as opposed to the toil itself. But I think what we said about the involvement in the learning would apply to this guy. But the other point I think you said is correct, which as well, which is that it's, even though this is his portion, you can still improve. And what is the key to improving? Atomic habits. Oop. It's not showing on the video. I don't know why. Why is it not showing on the video? That's weird. Okay. Atomic habits. Oh, because it's shiny. It's reflecting it. Okay. So, sorry. Atomic habits and just one second. And tiny habits. And since this is a new year, it's also not showing.
It matches your background too much. You have blur screen on.
Oh, that's weird. But I don't have blurry screen. That's weird. Whatever. Both of these books I recommend, and since it's a new year, then I recommend, if you have not read one, you should read it, and if you have read it, you should review it. I keep on going back and forth about which one's my favorite. Right now, Atomic Habits is my favorite, even though it is not as well written. Tiny Habits is it's more well written and it's a better system, but Atomic Habits is more practical in terms of, like, he gives you many techniques that you can change a whole lot by just establishing good habits. And even though by disposition you are inclined in a certain way, you can overpower the disposition to a great degree with your Atomic Habits. And how much you can improve it, you can't control. That's what he's saying. There's going to be a certain cap on how much you can improve, but you should always try to do that. And the toiling, that endeavor itself you're going to be rewarded for. Okay. Any comments or questions on this one? If not, then we will do our end of the shiur review and see if we answered all of our questions. Okay, so let us go to our questions and then see if we answered all of them. Let's close this. Okay, so what does it mean to be overpowered by your learning, and why are you not higher for that? So to be overpowered by your learning means stuff outside of your control, whether it is due to old age or sickness, or like how difficult the subject matter is, or like what else said also, like there's a certain like capacity where you just, new stuff replaces old stuff. And you're not high for that because you're not high for stuff that is I'll just work on a patre. You're not high for stuff that is outside of your control. Okay. It's not a moral failing. 2, what does it mean to sit and remove learning from your heart? So according to the Meiri, it is if you make a bad time investment that will cause a fixed interruption in your learning, and that's to be if you schedule that into your learning, or you misprioritize in terms of like what you devote your life to. So there, it's a separate liability. Not only are you giving into the part of yourself that wants to cast off the yoke of Torah, but you're also going to result in losing the Torah that you have gained. And furthermore, are these the only two possibilities? And is anything not in one category in the other? It would seem that they're in between cases. So have we answered that? According to Meiri? I mean, it seems to be, right? That there are only two types of decisions about how you use your time, right? That either, well, let me think about it for 1 second. So in other words, like this. Okay, either the forgetting is in your control or it's not in your control. If it's in your control, then yeah, I think it's as simple as that, right? Like essentially, this is dividing into forgetting that's in your control and forgetting that's not. And it might be hard to diagnose the cases. Like it is very hard to let's say to strike that balance and say, how much should I be reviewing and how much should I be like learning new stuff? But I think theoretically, all like Epictetus always says, there are things in my control, things that are not in my control. And your forgetting or your use of time is in your control. So there you go. For what does this pasuk have to do with Ramir's idea? So which is the pasuk is about Sinai. So there's my interpretation, which is that the purpose, which is for Rabbeinu Yonah, which is that God gave the Torah at Sinai so that we could keep it. And if you are forgetting Torah in a way that causes you to make mistakes, you're losing that Sinai, that part of Sinai. Or Devorah's answer was that, based on Rabbeinu Yonah, that this was God speaking to you and you forgot what he said, right? If you had proper awe, then you wouldn't forget what he said. 5, it's only human to forget. What if we had a bad memory? What are we supposed to do? So the answer is, on the one hand, yes, it's only human to forget. But what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to try to compensate for that by reviewing and by remembering. And by the way, it's not just reviewing, it's writing down good notes. It is, listening to shiurim again. It's double checking with a friend, who also learned the shiur. It is, there's a lot of stuff that you could do to prevent yourself from forgetting, making reminders. And what if you have a bad memory? You should still cultivate good habits. It's funny, the habits could be stuff like my 4-sentence summaries, or here's another one that I'm thinking of because of Rabbeinu Yonah. So you should all do this, by the way. Okay. Now, whenever I ask my posik for psak, okay, then if it was in a text message, I copy and paste the dialogue, put it in an email, send the email to myself, and make a label in Gmail that says psak. Okay. And if it is something that I heard bal peh, like he told me the psak, in person, I will, as soon as I get the opportunity, write it down or send myself a voice note. I'll email it to myself and label it as psak. Because how many times have you gotten a psak and you just don't remember the exact parameters of what the posik said, or someone asks what your posik paskins on something, and you're like, oh, I asked about that once, and I want to say it, but I don't have the exact words. So then you just pull it up in Gmail, and you should use technology for this. I mean, we have a lot of technology things available for us, even like, okay, here's another example. One of the most difficult concepts in Aristotelian metaphysics in the Rishonim is the active intellect. Okay, I can't tell you how many times I've tried to understand what the Rishonim mean by the active intellect. So finally, like this year, a couple months ago, I was learning with a chavrusa, and we got the perfect formulation of what the active intellect is. So I immediately busted out my my recorder. I recorded a 1-minute summary. This is my best understanding of the active intellect, and I sent it to myself, and I labeled it best summary of active intellect. And you just have it on my computer. So like there's a lot of stuff you can do to supplement for having a bad memory. Okay, but the point is that having a bad memory, being human, is excusable, but it's not an excuse. Okay, you will forget stuff, but you can do stuff. You still are responsible for doing stuff to minimize forgetting. Okay, doesn't matter what from your learning you're forgetting. It seems like there are things that are more important than others. The answer is yes, and to a certain extent, you should prioritize the things that are most important. And I think because we have limited time, you cannot remember everything you learn. Like you just can't. You can't even make time to review that. But if you don't set up good memory habits or good memory discipline, then you won't be able to control what you do and don't forget. So yeah, you should focus on the important stuff, but also focus on good systems, because that will be a safety net that will catch all the things. What's the relationship between this mission and the previous one? Can't you infer? What's the chiddush? So according to the Meiri, we said the last mission is incidental hafsakos of learning, and this one is there's no word of incidental, right? There's incidental and then like intentional, scheduled in. And according to Rabbeinu Yonah, the previous one was talking about lack of awe, and this one's talking about the consequences of forgetting in terms of halacha. Who's the audience? So I think this is one that is applicable to everybody based on their level. The chassid has to do this especially because he's involved in high levels of they're involved in high levels of Talmud Torah. But I think everyone should do this on their own level. Okay, so I think that answers all the questions. Are we good? Anyone have anything else to add or any other questions here?
From this, would you, like valuing, remembering, and like these habits, would you like prioritize like reviewing shiurim that you've learned? I mean, you can't, you have to decide to what extent, but like you prioritize reviewing things and remembering over like learning new stuff?
So yeah, I think this is a question we should all ask ourselves now, which is in our own learning schedule, we all have a certain amount of time we devote to learning. What is going to be the best for our relationship with learning? And I say relationship with learning because I think for some people, learning for an hour is a triumph, and the choice is either learn for an hour or not learn. And for that person to prioritize reviewing might jeopardize their strengthening of the relationship to learning. But for others of us, or let's say like someone in my position, like I could, most of my learning is devoted to preparing for shiurim. And honestly, one of the reasons that I record all my shiurim is so I have all of them. So if I need to review, I can review. Should I make time to like review stuff on my own? Like aside from the recordings, it's a good question. I think that's a very personal question that is highly dependent on how much time you have and where you're at in your learning and what your relationship is. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but I think it's worth asking ourselves. Maybe we could come up with principles. Okay, I think this is a very good practical mishnah, and it's good that we did this now back to back with last week, because we are going to be on break for the remainder of January. Next scheduled shiur is February 2nd, and we will continue on in Pirkei Avos, and I think it's going to be a new subject. Also, tomorrow is Q&A, so bring questions. The only reason I could foresee canceling is if for some reason I wake up and I have no voice. But if I'm like this, then I'll force myself through it. So it'll be good. Okay. Thanks for coming. This is good learning. All right, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Good night.